Anderson, and I have had a consulting practice, LMA Consulting Group, for about 13 years now. I work really exclusively with manufacturers and logistics organizations to provide a superior customer experience while making money and having more cash available, which really means less inventory. So how do we put that all together in a way to achieve scalable, profitable growth? And so I thought today would be good to also include Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth is an expert in ports. I really don't know anybody who knows more about ports. Ports and public policy, really. She's recently received her MBA in public policy from both USC and Hong Kong University, correct? And was the executive director of Future Ports, and now is the principal of Dialed In Partners. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Well, no, thank you, Lisa. A couple of things that I just wanted to point out is, as we're listening to some of the guests here today, is talking about China. Part of my master's program was to spend several weeks in multiple cities in China learning about the Chinese government and the way that they do business. And I couldn't agree with you more on some of the comments that you made about working with China. I also just got back from several weeks in South Africa, where I was in Eastern Africa, so talking about some of the things that they have happening in South Africa and then also in Zimbabwe. And I was amazed at the growth that I saw there. It is exploding in growth. President Jinping from China had just been there and signed some trade agreements with South Africa, and Parliament was not very pleased, to say the least. So they were in the middle of debates when I was there, so it was in the front page of all the papers. So the new president of South Africa was very pleased with himself for arranging for that trade agreement, but the rest of Parliament was not so pleased. So it'll be interesting to find out how that works out in Africa, and part of the BRICS nations, if you're familiar with the BRICS. But so it's fascinating as we look at what's happening in the U.S. and for those of us looking at a global perspective, how all of the pieces around the globe are also working at the same time. So.
Yeah, you see why I invited her to speak with me. So, you know, our understanding of who's going to be here today is possibly exporting to some degree and looking to expand it. So, you know, we thought we'll start real high level, give you some of the basics so that you can, you know, take off running, and we'll open it up to, you know, your questions, and I'll document some of those. So let's see here. All right, so starting really basic here. What I find is that the number one thing across the board is how to provide a superior customer experience. People used to call me for all sorts of reasons, manufacturers, distributors, and now pretty much everyone that calls is calling because they realize they need to provide superior customer experiences. Now, they may need to do it while making money, that's certainly important, but top of the mind is superior customer experience, because everybody's thinking of Amazon-like service. Does not matter. Most of my clients, if not all, don't compete with Amazon. But Amazon has changed every single one of them in the expectation. So that is also true of global logistics, because customers just don't care about our problems as far as getting things through the ports and, you know, trade war, they just don't care. They care about getting the product they need when they need it. So number two is speed, because, like, after all, Amazon. But, you know, if there's nothing, second most important would be speed, because really the idea there is that not just deliveries, because everybody wants deliveries like today would be good. Really, we don't even want to wait till tomorrow. Most of my clients, that's the expectation is within 24 to 48 hours is very common. I mean, I work with aerospace, so typically speaking, that is not the case in aerospace. But lead times have been reduced probably in half as far as the expectation, even in aerospace. You know, it could be 13 weeks. In the old days, 6 weeks is better now, where you'll get more orders. You know, some of them are a year, but, you know, going from a year to a half a year is not easy, if you will. But building products is another industry I work a lot with, and food and beverage is yet another one. Both of those, like yesterday would be fine. Like, figure it out for me and just get it where I need it to go. So speed is really important, but it's also speed of data, speed of information. And a lot of this, when you're dealing globally, is something to be thinking about as well, is you have to have the right information at the right place at the right time. And I think speed with everything you do. So, of course, like I said earlier, customers are the key. However, yes, when it comes to global logistics, a lot of the conversation and concern is how do I make money, profits, margins, and efficiencies. It is challenging. And a lot of the, like ocean carriers, don't make money. There's certainly with bankruptcies in the last year or so. So there's a lot of challenges to navigate. And so it's more about, and we'll come back to it, but it's more about thinking about the whole holistic view and how you can improve your entire supply chain than, trying to, nail down a smaller price or a lower price on any particular aspect. We can come back to that. So I'm starting off with some big themes. And then this is really the key. When it comes to logistics, these aren't necessarily in an order, but they're just in an order of how I thought about them. But really, nothing else matters if you don't consider culture, collaboration, and partnerships. As I said, I was at this executive roundtable last night where we were talking about growth strategies. And growth strategies is about growth. So, we were talking a little bit about export, we're talking about mergers or acquisitions, we're talking, different ways you can grow, organic growth. And I was facilitating this conversation, and it was pretty much impossible to get this group of CEOs off the idea of culture. Not that I was trying to, but, it was a conversation about growth. But the idea is that without the culture, growth's not happening, so don't even bother talking about it. So we spent actually almost the entire time talking about culture and collaboration, because that's how growth occurs. And it's also culture within their own company. And then you've got, when you're talking about global logistics, you have your cultures between where you're going, like Elizabeth was talking about. And some of the folks in the room were saying, Oklahoma is like going to another culture, so so they had some interesting stories. But there's a lot we could talk about here, and Elizabeth can certainly add some points of view on a couple of the areas that we have specific interest in today. So we thought, I'm going to go through like the basics of global trade and how to export next in terms of logistics, and give you some terms to go away with. And Emma, I don't know if it's possible, but I'm happy to send like a copy of the presentation.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll do that. But we wanted to like understand what you want to hear, because we have maybe 45 minutes, because we're a little short on time. So what's most important to you, so I know what to emphasize, like what's interesting to you?
Reaching the right contacts in the area.
Ah, okay, love it. So reaching the contacts, or the right contacts, actually. Yes, what else is, are you guys interested in?
Streamlining documentation.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of documentation. When I first started working, there was like, oh my God, we've always done export, and just like the people who were in those jobs were always loaded with documentation. I always thought, I don't want that.
I had one client in Vietnam, and they take up so much of my time just with the paperwork on each order.
Very true. Good question. Is anyone, yes?
I'm in the data business, so what's some special aspects of data transfer?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, because especially when you're going cross-culturally, actually one of the things that came up last night, seems like it wasn't meant to be related, but it's very related today, it appears, is that we were having this conversation about an agreement, because one of the CEOs was going to renegotiate some materials that relate to the trade war, and he was going to develop a new relationship. And they were talking about just a simple legal agreement, and how do we make this so that what he's saying is actually what's understood, because it's not not necessarily the same. Like, he actually got one of the documents back and he said, well, it's what I said, but it's not the intent, so we need to start again. So anyway, there's a lot of, and that's kind of related to data transfer, but also there's,
Yeah.
we could talk about blockchain and everything else.
I was gonna say this, the blockchain will eliminate some of these documentation nightmares, but we're not there yet.
True, true. Is there any other highlights that you have?
My 2 years experience of export.
The expedience, is that what you're saying?
Export.
I am exporter. Is that you should have a assured supplier. That is number one. Assured buyer. That is number two. Export financing. That is number three.
All right.
And the last one is a marketing. You call it logistics. So I put it in 4 steps.
Well, the good news is that a lot of those topics.
I am exporter since 2 years.
Very good. Well, a lot of those topics are the ones that we're addressing today, so that's good. That's a good. I may not address them all, but one of my colleagues is going to. All right. Any other thoughts, and then I'll hear. Yes. Costs.
The outgoing cost of, or the, maybe addressing, really it's an imbalance.
Yeah.
It's an imbalance.
When I did my, when I spoke to Pat on the phone, I think even sending a sample, across the globe for someone to try our soups, which I think are amazing because they're gluten-free and vegan, especially gluten-free when someone can't take gluten. But the cost of sending that sample across the globe was just too expensive. So you kind of say, oh, if it's going to cost me more to do that than to sell locally.
Very true.
Well, it wasn't even a matter of, international, global versus
Right.
local.
Right.
It was prohibitive.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
so,
period.
I took it, I gave it to the person, and she told me how much. I said, give that back to me. And I told my contact, I said, I'm sorry, we'll have to connect later because right now it's crazy.
Out of curiosity, how much was it?
It was for 2 boxes of dry soup, and it was under 5 pounds. They wanted $200. I was, give that back to me. I said, that's ridiculous. And the buyer, I've worked in China, and I've exported, via companies, and I couldn't even believe it. And then I was wearing a jade bracelet that came from Tibet, and at least what was on the package said it was $7. It was like, there's a little imbalance here. And I want to know what the heck we're doing about it.
Well, so the good news about this is I'll tell you what I know, and I'll also be happy to, know 2 people can answer all the questions. But actually, between the 2 of us, we have a vast network of logistics and trade resources. So whatever we might not be able to answer here today, we will absolutely follow up and at least put you in touch with folks who can answer them. So feel free to contact us. I'll put my information at the end. So where do we start when we're looking to export? So we'll go through this so that I can make sure that
I'm going to give you a little extra time.
Yeah, what time am I supposed
So
to?
you were supposed to go from 9:15 to 10:15, so why don't we take it to 10:30?
Okay.
And then we'll take a break.
All right, very good. So where do we start? So actually, Chris brought this up, and that is that first, it's a different way of thinking. When we're talking about global logistics, we're not shipping within the states anymore, and that's just different. It's a different frame of mind. So it's not just a truck shipping. Now we're talking about more complex global, and there's definitely costs involved in the process and complications. But that's not to deter you, because there are resources that can actually help you through this, especially as you're just getting started, that are well worth it. Like, you really don't want to know, when you first started using the computer, you did not need to know how to build that whole computer to be successful. You don't need to know. It's everything about export and global logistics to be successful. You just need to get the right contacts and be in touch with the right people to start this process. So there is vast opportunity. There's 95% of the opportunity for, growth is outside of the U.S. So vast opportunity to export. May as well see what you can do. So again, from the very basic point of view, figured this is good. We all, typically like pictures. So, we start with the factory, we're manufacturers. So that's pretty clear. We use trucks, that we do today too, so this is pretty easy. And we, typically I'm sending it to a forwarder warehouse. That's the first step. Then we go from the forwarder warehouse, we go through customs and export clearance. And we'll talk more about a few of those details, but Chris brought up a few of them. Like you can't ship to every country you may want to, because there's maybe security reasons, etc., why you can't. And then you go to the port of loading. So really good news here as far as being exporting here is that LA and Long Beach are, the largest ports in the US. They're in the top 10 list. Elizabeth's going to give us more information about that. But there's, we have them in our backyard. So there's definite advantages here. From the origin port, it basically gets on a boat and transports to where it's going. Now, there is air freight too, but boat, plane, it's got to go in something like that, to the destination port. So, so far, so good. You would be surprised how complicated all this really sounds. If when I was reading the last couple of days, I was preparing for this presentation and reading a bunch of stuff about logistics, and it sounds far more complicated. So I'm really trying to simplify it here. And then from the destination port, it goes to CFS. There's also all these terms, you pretty much have to have a dictionary to try to figure out what is going on. I go to some clients and they talk in foreign language. They're not, but they have all these terms that mean something in their company that you have to have this cheat sheet to figure out. Well, that's sort of foreign trade as well. So CFS is Container Freight Station, which is sort of like a warehouse. And then you go to Customs and Clearance again. So of course, now that you're on the other side, Customs and Clearance, go back in a truck of some kind, and you finally get to the customer. So really it's not that complicated, but there are certainly a lot more steps than just going from the manufacturer in the truck to the customer. You may go to a distributor or something, but still, that's pretty clear. Now, what's also true about this is in addition to more steps, there's certainly different cultures between, going to different countries. There's different laws. One of the other things that I talked to some experts to prepare for this as well. One of the things they said is that, again, don't think like you're in the US. You have to start thinking globally because we are somewhat protected with all sorts of laws and regulations. So it makes us think that everybody that we're working with is going to have those same laws and regulations, and they don't. So therefore, we cannot be thinking like we're still in the US, or we will run into trouble. Now, you don't have to know all these things because that's very overwhelming, or could be. Again, if you get in touch with a few of the right people, you'll be fine. But it is something to start thinking about now. I'm now global, so I should really understand what's going on with where I'm going. So where do we start? Ocean freight options and terminology. Like I said, it's very complicated because in terms of it sounds complicated anyway. But the idea here is 80-20. It all makes sense. If you have, you do use trucks today, so you probably think the same thing, but on ships. Now, when we're talking about ocean freight, so a full truckload. If we're shipping full truckloads to our customers, clearly that's better because one, full truckloads tend to get there faster because they're going direct. Two, they're less expensive, to your point, because after all, they're full from you. You don't have to stop other places. I used to lead a group or a company where we had multiple stop truckloads, and I spent all sorts of time trying to figure out how to stop in a route that made sense, and how to best fill the truck so that it was in the right order, and all these things I was thinking about. If you have a full truckload, which is probably hard to do though if you're new to export, but this is conceptually, right? When you get to full truckloads, clearly you're going to have a cost advantage, speed advantage, and it's just less complicated. So that's a full container load in this case. Of course, the option is a less than container load, which is most likely, I mean, I can't imagine anyone starting to export and having an entire container load, but you know, it's possible. It's happened. Actually, one of my clients was a startup, and they said, they start big because they're supplying people like phone suppliers and, you know, like massive companies. So, you know, there are exceptions, but apparently there's one even in the room. But less than container load is possible. And then you know, why we have to make it complicated, you know, it's the NVOCC, you know, we'll just start using terms here. But basically it's like a common carrier, so it's not your truck, you know. Basically we're filling a container load with other people. It's really the case. So, you know, again, we're collaborating here. And of course it costs more because we have to coordinate with other people to fill the container. There's coordination on how you load it, because that's one of the complications is what order do you load it in so you get it off in the right order, and you know, how does it, the idea with containers and trucks is the more you can fit, the better it is, basically, because it costs less money, because it's all about weight. If you have a heavy product, that's going to be your concern. So it's all about weight and dimensions. So like when I was the vice president of operations, we were making a fluffy product. It was adult diapers and also like pads that go underneath chicken in the grocery stores, which very different uses, but fluffy, lightweight. Clearly I didn't have a weight issue. However, I really had a size issue because, you know, they're fluffy. So, you know, you have to figure out how you're gonna, like, there's a lot of time spent, how you fit enough of these boxes into a container or into a truck. And those are the things you'd want to be thinking about, so that when you're exporting, that gives you some idea of cost. Are you going to be in the high end or the low end? Well, do you have a big product? Do you have an oversized and weird shaped product? That could be a problem. Do you have a lightweight product? I mean, some of these will dictate the mode of transportation and the speed, which is very important. You know, then there's other things like, you know, bulk, so, you know, grain, that kind of stuff. RORO. Basically, row, thank you. Row, roll on, row off.
Most fun word to say. The row ship.
And break bulk. So, you know, these are some of the terms. I'm not going to go into a lot of details because then we'll be here forever. Same thing is true in terms of air freight, so we'll kind of go through that as well. And you know, it's conceptually very similar. Now we're talking about a plane. And obviously you're not going to, I mean, it's ridiculous to think about. You're not going to fill a plane with individual pieces of something. That would be insane. So obviously you're putting it into, you know, basically containers, not the same kind of container, but you're putting it in something. It's either a box or whatever. But you have consolidation, which is basically, in this case, we're going to talk about forwarders, so if you don't know what that is, you have to explain. But basically, you can read here, but you know, we have consolidation, we have direct air freight, which is as it sounds, right? You're consolidating, similar to consolidating in terms of, you know, adding multiple parts or whatever to where you're going. And there's different ways you can go. Pieces, pallets, ULDs, just because we want to make it more complicated again and give more abbreviations, but you can see what that really means. So now I'm going to get to the most important slide probably that I have here for a new exporter, because this is your friend. Who is a freight forwarder? That's who you need to know. And Elizabeth and I have some really good connections in that industry, and getting a good freight forwarder, especially for a new person to export, is very important. And don't be looking for the lowest cost freight forwarder, because as a new person to export, I'm not suggesting you should pay, you know, top dollar, but the freight forwarder that maybe charges 5% more than the rest and helps you stay out of all sorts of trouble and saves you probably, you know, 20 times, 100 times that amount by making sure that you navigate the process successfully, classify things successfully, and basically save money in the long run is well worth it. Basically, your freight forwarder is the person to start with when you're exporting, and getting a good one is a good idea. So usually, these are the roles of a freight forwarder. So, you know, helps you, usually arranges the pickup from the factory, often acts as the agent for export clearance, all this paperwork we're talking about. Selects the carrier, who knows what's the right carrier to choose, where you're going. There's just so many things to think about. Why worry about all those things when you're new? Now, when you've been in export for a long time, there are freight forwarders that deal in high volume. Therefore, the transactional price is lower, and it really doesn't make sense to pay extra, a little bit extra even, when you have the knowledge in-house and as you get bigger. So things evolve as you scale your logistics front. But start off, is the one thing to take away from this presentation. And Elizabeth and I both actually followed up several of our key contacts to say, really what would be most relevant to a manufacturer. And we both got the same advice, and that is start with your freight forwarder. So I'll stick to this slide because I think it's the most important part, and it also does control the largest portion of your costs when you're talking about global logistics, which is, of course, important from a cost point of view. And it's not, just remember, it is not all about the specific price they tell you. And when you look at regulations, and there's just like a lot of complexities here. So there are ways of, there's always games, right? There's always games. So it could be that you have a lower price per, remember it's weight and its dimensions, right? So your price per whatever, kilo or something, might be slightly lower by someone else, but if they're rounding up in terms of dimensions or weight, believe me, you're gonna end up worse off. So there's just a lot of things to worry about. You can think you're doing just great, and you're not at all doing great. So there's a lot of things to think about, and it's just worth it to get a good freight forwarder. So, would you add anything to that, Elizabeth? Before we
No, I think think of the freight forwarder as your travel agent that is helping you navigate and to make all of the arrangements. Most of you probably would not consider going to a foreign country you've never been to before, if you've never traveled. If you were never a international traveler and just decided you were going to start traveling internationally, you might not just start making reservations without knowing where you were going or knowing the culture. So think of that as for your product. You don't want to be sending your product out without having someone there helping you that has the experience and the knowledge that you don't have.
That's really a great way to look at it, because travel agents know, no, don't go to that section of the city. That's not the best place to be, right? Well, it's the same thing. And it's not necessarily don't go to that country. It's here's how you navigate successfully in this country to keep yourself out of those. Who wants to go to, what is it called? There's this terrible area in Chicago that one of my colleagues drove through by accident. It's like places you try to avoid. So additional service. So here's another key point that really sounds very simple, and for a manufacturing group, you'll understand. But these are some of the things to really think about when you're exporting. It doesn't have to be terribly complicated, but you really do need to understand your packaging and your labeling. Because remember, it's not as simple as going to Iowa with your product, where it's all going on a truck and it's clear, it's all fine. The packages, the inner packages, the labeling so that the boxes can stay together or whatever we're shipping. So the packaging, the labeling requirements, do they help on the customer side? A lot of this is working with your customer so that they can help navigate how to get this product. I mean, basically all we're trying to do is get it from us to our customer with the least cost possible and the best service possible. And so utilizing your customer is going to be very helpful. Now your customer is going to be a part of this global logistics network, and their partners could be very important to this process too. Yes?
So I see your letters of credit up there. With the technology available today, are we getting away from having to use letters of credit, or is that still?
Letters of credit are still necessary.
No.
With that said, there's blockchain and there's other opportunities for down the line, but as far as
Most of my clients is not accepting LC.
what do they accept?
I want cash.
Oh, well.
Yeah. We do a lot of.
Because we don't want to spend 6% and 7% of $1 million on LC.
Yeah, you know what, I think, it does depend, okay, so it depends on where you are in your business in terms of exporting. So like, are you new to export? Different things are available to you than if you have a little bit of experience in export, or if you're a long-time exporter. Different things are available to you, and then it also depends on where you're going and who the customer
And
is.
it depends on which bank you're with.
And which bank you're with. And then Elizabeth, I could see that, or I felt like you were wanting to say something to that. Did you?
Oh, just the blockchain it just isn't here yet, I think, in order to really make a difference. It's in development and certainly something that they're looking at. I've had a lot, I've hosted a couple of conferences the last few years where we've had speakers on blockchain technology, and it is certainly the hot topic, but I don't think that it's quite there yet as far as the answer. It will be. It's kind of like the internet. When the internet was in its infancy, I think blockchain is in its infancy, and they're looking at how they can implement it, but it's not quite there yet as far as the end-all answer for that visibility, but certainly it is promising.
Yes.
What's the difference between a freight forwarder and say throwing some stuff in the box and then just bringing it to like DHL or something?
That's a great question.
Well, so the freight for it's actually somewhat. I think I would go back to Elizabeth's analogy. Thank you. Is it sort of like going to the travel agent that understands your marketplace? Now, if you know enough to say, okay, DHL is not thinking about you. Their job is to get it from point A to point B, and for you to worry about all these other things in the middle. So if that route is chosen, like it's DHL, and it could be in some cases that DHL could be perfectly fine. It gets your product there the best way possible. And a good freight forwarder, if they really see that was the case, they would tell you, this is the situation.
They're kind of like brokers, and they kind of line stuff up.
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead.
And I've had experiences where the freight forwarder has stepped in, even at the level of harmonized tariff codes, to assist with better tariffs.
Well,
So-
there was a speaker to a group that actually Brian and I are in. And there was somebody who was talking about what you were just talking about, the harmonized codes, and he was giving some really scary examples of how you can easily misclassify products and cost yourself a lot more money. Again, a good reason to have like the experts starting the process and get the right people involved, because you think you're saving money and then you...
I want to add before you...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, that's okay.
Um,
I'm good.
One of the things that is happening more and more with some service providers is that they are providing full service. So depending on your commodity that you're selling, depending on the quantity that you're looking at, if you're sending a box, that might, one of these boxes, then yes, you might be easier just to send it to DHL. If you are looking at selling a pallet of something, if you are looking at selling, agriculture, you're sending a whole container full of pork to the east, to Asia, you probably want to use an exporter. So I think a freight forwarder. So I think it just depends on the commodity and the quantity and where you're sending it to. Some of the railroads, such as our Class 1 railroads here in Southern California, Union Pacific and BNSF, for large shippers, they are offering full service. So you can go to them if you are from, let's just say that you're from the San Joaquin Valley and you want to send a bunch of agriculture to Asia. That would probably be your best bet if you're an almond grower and you want to send something, and to go to one of those railroads and use them as a full service. And if that's all that you're doing, but that would be something to look into, your options, and find the best option for your product that you're selling.
That's a really good point. I mean, it is true. One box, I also would not go to a freight forwarder because it doesn't make sense. With that said, and if there's full service, basically full service option means finding an expert that knows your industry and going with it. And from that point of view, we can help you identify some of those, yes.
So two questions. One, the railroad, that I would have never guessed. I would have just gone
Yeah.
right to UPS or, you know, one of
See,
the-
again, I get credit for bringing the right people.
So, thank you. So is there a hub or one place where you can go and find all the options for freight forwarders and say, okay, I'm food and beverage, let me go there, and what are my options? So you can start calling people and see which one.
If only, I mean, I think that's the thing, it's a sort of like we're all in a relationship business. I find, you know, I work mostly with manufacturers, really, and, you know, we think we're technical and we produce products, but really it's a relationship business. So it's finding the right contacts to go to who know the people to go to. With that said, the Journal of Commerce is like the best source of information when it comes to global trade and global logistics. And they have some lists like that. It reminds me of one list that related to transportation rates that they had, but unfortunately it's not that, I mean, it would be nice, right, if it was that simple,
It
but
was
it's just not.
Maybe that exists. But my second question, is one of the presenters gonna get into explaining the blockchain and kind of where we are? Just give us an overview, where we're at, and what
I can
the
add it to this
details.
list, because if they're not, I can, you know, give you a second at the end. Or actually, Hema, are you gonna talk about that?
I could touch on
Because
this.
Hema's got some expertise in
I'm
blockchain as
passionate
well.
about blockchain, but just to go back to costs and logistics, there has been a trend in the last few years where, do you remember the whole media coverage on how there were containers being held up at the ports in LA and Long Beach? I think I want to say it was a couple of years ago.
Well, pretty
Yeah,
much.
I have
Because
people,
it's strike.
I have people calling when
Because
there's,
of the longshoreman strike.
Yeah.
yeah.
Between the strikes and holdups and everything else, the Chinese were very smart. Instead of sending container loads into our ports, they started to sell on eBay and Amazon in small parcels. So you can actually buy ones and twos, and they would ship direct to your home. And guess who got the contract to do all the freight?
US Post Office.
Thank you very much. So USPS actually is a very cost competitive.
It's true, that is true.
Yes,
There is
but
something
see,
to
that
say.
goes back to the imbalance, because here you have a government
Yeah.
negotiating
Right.
for their country,
Right.
a huge country. In the US, we're not doing that. Our government is not doing anything that I've seen to help with that imbalance. Because it's not just those individual companies coming to me, they're going through a government, it's like Amazon.
Are you talking about the US-China trade and cost difference between going back and forth?
No, I just based
No,
on
just-
what was just said, if China went to the US Post Office and negotiated a contract, that makes perfect
Well,
sense,
I don't
because.
think that's the case either. I think it's more like the individual, the manufacturers are talking to the
I
US Post
don't
Office.
No, but
think that's
I think,
happening. No,
but I think
that's
USPS
happening.
has gone to China per se.
Yeah, that would
And
make
they're
more
getting the
sense.
volume of business from
Yeah.
China. And as much as there are issues around all of this.
Well, you know, that is one of the points that the experts that I talked with brought up, and I'll write that down as well, this imbalance idea. But that is one of the issues, is that the way to think about it is, if you're a manufacturer, you expect things like how we've, the regulations and the ability to do the things we do here that don't necessarily exist elsewhere. So that is why you do want to go to some of these people I'm talking about, like the freight forwarders and the other people who are known for being the conduits between countries and depending on what you're doing, yes.
It's just an input thing. So, manufacturers in Colorado, they manufacture motor oil. We're going to send it to Southeast Asia. They also have a factory in Tucson, obviously closer to the LA port. But this is what was interesting when you did the analysis, and I talked to the freight forwarder and asked him, give me the numbers from Tucson to LA to Southeast Asia. Same from Colorado. It was cheaper from Colorado. And you say, well, that can't be possible. In Colorado, they put the container on a railroad.
Right. Well, and that
It
goes
was
back to
actually
the
more
railroad.
expensive to ship it by putting it on a truck from Tucson. In that case, the analysis actually was done by the manufacturer and myself, and the freight forwarder was just providing numbers. But on the other end, it could have been the other way around, because the freight forwarder figures which shipping line we're gonna use, which trucking company are we gonna use to get it to so-and-so when we get to X country, which in this case had to do with the cross-country transshipment, which is another story. Anyway, so
No,
it's fun.
your point's valid, is that that's why you go to people like the freight forwarder, because they understand the markets you're dealing with. There are countless ways. Goods movement would seem like it's relatively simple. You just go from point A to point B, but there are countless people in the middle and ways to go from place to place, and different costs and duties, and it could go on and on. So it's a good idea to get, they can save you a lot of money, and not everything makes sense. in the end.
The reason I was asking about if it was China, I mean, and you bring up a good point, it's considerably more expensive to have a single container shipped to Las Vegas than it is to have a container shipped from China to the US. And that's a difference of, what, 8,000 miles? But it's 70% more expensive. So foreign companies that have warehouses, great, we can get a fantastic warehouse in Las Vegas for a third of the price, but it's not cost efficient. They should just have it here, in fact.
No, it's very true, because I did a study for clients. They were trying to decide if they should renew their lease in Southern California. And they were thinking maybe I'd go somewhere else, because after all, there's like a lot of taxes and problems. And, really, there's just a huge amount of, there's a lot of advantages to Southern California. I have a slide about that, but basically there is that same thing you were just saying, is that really from a cost perspective, it really made sense for them to stay in their case. It depends on what your network is, where you're getting stuff, etc. Did you want to say something, Elizabeth?
Two things. First, immediate about that, a term that we all know, economies of scale.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's cheaper. Instead of shipping one container 500 miles, you're shipping 18,000 containers. Those large ships have 18,000 containers on them now. There's orders for more than 20,000 containers on one ship. So you've got economies of scale, so that's how that works. But the other part to your question about how do I find all of this information, there is an organization, and I think that it's in the fine print on our slides, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
To the LACBFF.com or
Yeah.
.org. It's the
You'll
Los
get it on your
Angeles,
slides.
yeah, it's the Los Angeles Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association. That's a trade association of not all of, but of many custom brokers and freight forwarders. And that is a good resource for you to call and get information. A lot of the information that I receive is from their former chair of that organization, who's a good friend of mine. So he was the first person I called.
Yeah.
And so it's the network.
It's the network, exactly.
It's the network and if they don't, they would have someone, or at least the easiest thing to do would just be to look on their directory and pick one. Pick three and call them.
Unfortunately, the devil's in the detail, and
Yep.
quite often it lands on the manufacturer's due diligence, right? To do the weight, the comparisons, and
True.
Yeah.
And that's where, yes, so anyway, she's got a point though, because like between the Journal of Commerce is more of a, like the industry standard news, and information. And then there's trade associations. There's actually quite a few trade associations. And the one that Elizabeth just mentioned will give you some lists of people like freight forwarders. And then you also want to remember that it is a relationship area, so you maybe pursue both, right? That's sometimes the best way to go.
Could you add to your list co-op? Some
Sure.
co-op opportunities, since we're talking small business, for opportunities or organizations, and maybe they would, what we're talking about would fall into that. So you can consolidate. I'm out of San Diego County. There's so many small businesses with amazing vegan food products.
Right.
So a co-op where you can consolidate a container and.
Well, and I think that I have seen some clients do that pretty successfully. Were you going to say something?
No, I
Okay.
agree.
So I'll send this. Oh, yes.
This is probably a digression, but I was just following on his point, which was, what are some of the pitfalls of cash versus letter of credit? And
Well, so one of, so what, the
It goes
contact.
up to 9%.
I don't know, we mentioned.
Well, what, my contact was saying yesterday, that as far as what's probably most important is that the thing to remember is that you may not get paid later. So definitely you want to have a letter of credit that's secured so that you can make sure you get paid. Cash up front means you get paid, right? And other options are risky, unless you have a long-standing relationship, unless, you know, there's extenuating circumstances. But in global transportation, and, you know, I'm sure your presentation will cover some of this, I'm by no means an expert, but basically the idea is you need to make sure that you actually do get paid in this process, because it's
So, I
It's
mean,
not as
essentially, there's no
easy
problem
done.
with cash at all, is what you're saying.
no, I can't, well, is there cash?
There
I
could
mean,
be
you
a lot
know.
of problems with cash. You have no recourse.
The answer to that is it depends.
I knew
That's
that
where
was the
I
answer,
was
but I knew that was the answer, but I
Where
was
are you
trying.
getting cash from and where did they get the cash from?
Right.
And where did they get the cash
So
from?
the traceability,
Yes.
I see.
Well,
I
in
just
most
want
of
to
my-
add to that, Lisa, also, at what stage is the cash actually going to be transmitted to them? That's going to be the challenge as well. At what stage do they expect to receive that money?
I see.
And what's the trigger for it?
From that point of view, a letter, I mean, you know, the standard is the letter of credit because it eliminates a lot of those issues. But, so, you know, what's really important here is we get back to speed. So how long will it take? And so from that point of view, I'm gonna switch places with Elizabeth so she can, so that she can talk through a few of these, because we've got our,
Yeah, we've got coming up here.
let me know,
So
or you can, let me know and I'll flip the
if you want to
slides.
jump in anytime
Yep.
on any of these.
I
So
will.
how long will it take? We talk about the port-to-port terms, and for instance, going from one of the ports in China to LA Long Beach is about 2 weeks average time. But there could always be a disruption, such as the labor issues that we have.
Right.
So that could add days, weeks, months onto that schedule. But one of the other things to consider is the time sensitiveness of your product. If you are shipping something for retail and you are one of our big box stores and you need something on the shelf for a specific holiday, you've got that promotion, you want to get it there as fast as possible. We all know that one of our biggest retailers, Walmart, has very little inventory storage. They have things coming in and they use transit as their warehouse and inventory. So they want to get that merchandise in and get it on the shelf as soon as possible. If you have something, so they don't have a lot of lag time in when it gets shipped and when it's going to get out on their shelves. If you are a low volume, low value importer, then, and it doesn't really matter, you've got some time, you can actually think about sending your products through the Panama Canal to the east coast of the US. On a smaller ship, it's going to take longer. That might take about twice as long, but it's going to be lower cost. But once you get it to the east coast, now you've got to get it back to the west coast. So, you know, so that could, you know, with the time, might still be less expensive in the long run, but you've got that extra time. So now you're going to add on another couple of weeks by the time you get it back to where you want to go. So time is of the essence for most of us. We're in a we want it now mode, so most of us don't have that much time to think about that. And there is no agency that monitors the transit times. That is something that's kind of self-regulated within the industry. Journal of Commerce, there's a lot of self-reporting, or the ports. The ports will kind of monitor that themselves. No, the ships do not run on rails. And there are, you know, one of the other things to think about, what we're looking at right now on the East Coast is the hurricane coming into North Carolina, South Carolina. Savannah, Georgia has one of the biggest ports on the East Coast now. But if that hurricane hits Savannah, that's going to have a lot of disruption in the ships. The ships can't come into the port. The port may be damaged. Katrina many years ago really damaged the Port of New Orleans. And the executive director of that port was a good friend of mine, Gary Lagrange, and he came out and spoke at one of my conferences to talk about how they got that port back up and running very, very quickly. But that was still a disruptor, and that cargo had to go somewhere else in the meantime. So those are things to think about. Labor unrest, all you can do is monitor contracts and think about, and the big shippers do. They monitor the contracts, and if they see where there's going to be a contract negotiation, they might start shipping to another, one of the other ports. They have now what they call a four-corner strategy. It used to be LA Long Beach was the only place that they shipped. Nowadays, they have a four-corner strategy to look at, well, if something's happening in the Northwest, if something's happening in labor in the South, in the Southwest, if there's a hurricane somewhere else, then they can look at other options. We've got transloading, which is just moving a cargo from one to another, which could take actual time. Every time you move the cargo, it takes time. You want to get that cargo from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Every time you touch it, it's time and money.
Same thing as in your manufacturing operation. You know, anytime it's sitting around where you touch it, there's, you know, it adds up.
Yeah. Time to unload the container. One of the things that we're finding at the ports is that as the ships get bigger, it does take longer to unload that ship because there's only so many, so much capacity within that terminal. There's only so many cranes. There's only so many gangs of the workers that they can put on there at once. The ports have really tried to get a hold of that here in the LA Long Beach area, and they're really trying to make sure that they can address that. What used to happen at the ports is most of the year, because the ships were smaller, they could adjust, and we had more of a flat line of the cargo. You know, it fluctuated a little bit. Now, with the big ships coming in, we get giant peaks and valleys. The peaks are when the big ships come in, and then the ships are gone, and we have a big valley. So they're trying to adjust that. As with all of us, with our capacity and our ability to manufacture or whatever it is, when you have that peak and valley, it makes a huge difference.
Since you're talking about these containers, it kind of made me wonder about what's happening with CT-PAT and that, you know, with the
You're talking about the security?
yeah.
Yeah, you know,
And rolling it out, you know, at offshore.
yeah,
ports.
one of the guys from the LA customs broker is in Orlando right now at ACPAC conference. So
So
the
that's
short
still
answer
rolling
is-
out and still.
yeah, the short answer is we'll put it on here and get back to you.
That's right. But there's definitely a lot of conversation about it.
Yeah, it's C dash, I think.
CT-PAT.
Yeah,
CT-PAT.
Yeah.
Got it.
What does it stand for? You have to look it up, but it's for, yeah, and it was set up to scan and take care of the security in foreign ports, so we don't wait and have the risk be at the US ports. So this was rolled out by the US government, but it's caused a lot of havoc in terms of efficiencies and, you know, then you have to segregate US containers and send them through scanning and
They are.
so it was really, I know I was dealing with it years ago when it rolled out, and there were so many, so much pushback from, you know, large ports going, look, you know, we're moving all these containers and you want us to break out just American containers. But that's basically what the US government was suggesting, so that the risk is found elsewhere, not at the US ports.
I will tell you that our ports are very safe. I know that they're doing a lot of screening, and they are making it very efficient, and our ports are very safe. I'm not as
She would know.
engaged on the detail, but I live about 2 miles from the Port of LA, and I don't worry about it. So, yeah, if I was worried, I wouldn't live there. So.
So that's very complex. There are 5 Muslims. One will be a terrorist, another will be Al-Qaeda, another will be a doctor, and third will be an engineer, you know. So you cannot
Well,
live
it's,
like that.
but it's in place. That's why I was wondering, is it still going or?
Oh, it's still oh,
What
yes.
was the, you
Oh,
know,
yeah,
it's
it's still
kind of
going and
falling out,
it's
but-
being, you know,
Okay.
they're developing new technologies all the time.
Mhm.
So that's something they're
Okay, thank
very
you for
much on
that.
top
I
of that.
just, yeah, I was curious when you were talking about all
Well,
the.
and that kind of addressed the
Containers
last,
and
one of the last bullets on that other
Mhm.
slide is custom examinations and that. And then we talked about natural disasters. So I spoke a little bit about how long it takes, you know, kind of where you're going from point A to point B, which way you're manufacturing, and then what your point of entry is. One of the other things that we're looking at now also is as manufacturing moves from China and moves west, they're looking at Vietnam and India, and then even talking about Africa. As costs go up in China for manufacturing, they're looking at where can we get lower costs? So in the future, we might be looking at manufacturing moving to India and Vietnam and Africa, and then it will be too long for them to come to LA Long Beach. So now they're going to be looking at going through the Suez Canal and then across the U.S., across the Atlantic to the eastern seaboard. The challenge that we have with the eastern seaboard is that they have very shallow water, and they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have, they have the weather, they have different weather, but it's the water and the infrastructure. We have
You can't
the
change
beautiful-
water, but you can
can't-
change the infrastructure.
We can change, well, you can't change the water, you can dredge and make the channels deeper,
Yes.
but it's extremely expensive. It's extremely expensive to do that because you have to maintain it, and building all of those beautiful warehouse distribution centers and railroads that we have here in the Inland Empire is very, very expensive. So that, if there's one more slide, maybe not.
Do you want me to go back?
No, the one is fine with the global picture. One of the, the next slide. Why SoCal is an ideal location. You are blessed to live in this area and wanting to export because you are in the best place in the U.S. to do that. We have the largest ports in the Western Hemisphere, in North or South America, right here in Southern California, LA Long Beach. Combined, they import about 16 million containers a year. The next largest port to do that is New York, New Jersey, at about 7 million. So we're twice the size of New York, New Jersey. The next largest port in California is Oakland at about 2 million. So we really are the premier place to do exporting if it's what your career goals are. We have the largest network of railroads, warehouse distribution, trucking, and professionals and industry professionals. So this is the ideal place to put it. The biggest customers in the world are going to be China and Asia. They're our #1 trading partners. And they also have, out of the 7 largest ports in the world, the top 5 are in China. The only 2 that are not in China that are in the top 7 are Singapore at #2 and Busan, South Korea at #5. So the top 5 of the top 7 in the world are in China. So it's a great place to be exporting to if that's what you're interested in, as far as growing your business. 100 trains a day, low export rates, 80 plus weekly sailings to the Pacific Rim, and then the equipment. So you're in the ideal location to do that. So congratulations. And the first step, your first step is being location, location, location. You're in the right place.
It's true, location and then context and resources is a really good one.
Just to add to that, I mean, why do so many people have a perception that it's terrible to do business in Southern California?
Well, it's the taxes and the
It's
regulations,
expensive.
but
Yeah.
taxes and regulations don't help. But everything else about